Alright guys, so in the last video we implemented React, we installed Webpack and Babel, React, React DOM, all that stuff, and we got it all working so that we're actually displaying our React application within the Django front-end app. So now what I want to do is implement Redux because we need a single source of truth. We basically need application level state because we're going to have, for instance, leads. We're going to have authentication, which is the main reason I'm using Redux, so that we have a state where it can tell us if we're authenticated or not, can tell us what user is logged in, things like that, give us the user data. So I'm not going to get too in depth with the inner workings of Redux. I would suggest watching either my Redux crash course or maybe my React front to back course on Udemy or someone else's Redux course if you know nothing about it. At least maybe look at the documentation. But I'll try to explain things as best I can without really getting hung up on it. So one thing that I would highly recommend is installing the Redux dev tools for Chrome. So if you go here, just go ahead and install it, and then when you open your Chrome tools, you should have a tab for Redux. Okay, and you'll see no store found right now because obviously I haven't installed it yet. I haven't set up my store, but once you do that, you'll see a clear image of what your Redux store looks like in all your state. All right, so I would definitely suggest installing that. All right, so let's head over to our terminal. I stopped my Webpack from running here, and I'm just going to do an npm install, and we want Redux, we want React-Redux, because Redux is completely separate from React. It's just very popular to use with React, and this React Redux package is what basically binds them together. All right, so we're going to want that. Let's see, we're also going to want Redux Thunk. So Redux Thunk is a piece of middleware that we're going to use so that we can make asynchronous requests from our actions. And then we're also going to install the Redux-DevTools-extension, which it just makes it a little easier to set the DevTools extension up rather than doing it manually. So I think that's all we need for right now. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, so now I'm going to run npm run dev again, which should start up Webpack. Okay, good. Let's just reload this, make sure that's still working. So first thing that I always do when I'm starting to implement Redux, I think the first thing most people do is create their store. So in the lead manager front end source folder, we're going to create a file called store.js. Okay, and inside this store.js, we're going to bring in a few things from Redux. Actually, I'm going to do imp tab and bring this in from Redux. We're going to bring in a couple things. So we want to put in our curly braces. We're going to bring in create store, which is responsible for actually creating the store. Apply middleware. Since we're using Thunk, which is a piece of middleware, we need to bring this in. And I think that should be it. All right, so let's go ahead and also import. Actually, let's do imp tab and let's bring in Redux DevTools extension. And from that, we want to bring in something called compose with DevTools. Okay. And then let's see, we want to import Thunk. Okay, any middleware that we use, we want to bring that in. And Thunk is going to come from Redux-Thunk. And we also want to bring in our root reducer. Okay, I'll get into reducers in a minute, but we want to bring in root reducer, and that's going to be from /reducers. So what this means is it's going to look for a file called index.js inside of a folder called reducers. All right, now our store is going to have an initial state. So let's say initial state, which is just going to be an empty object. And then let's create another variable for any middleware we're going to use, which is going to be an array, and we're just going to have thunk. Okay, then we want to create our store variable, and set that to create store, which we just brought in up above. Okay, now this takes in a couple things. It takes in your root reducer, which we'll create in a minute. It takes in the initial state, which we just added up above, and then any middleware we want. Now, since we're using the DevTools extension, we're going to use compose with DevTools, and then inside here we're going to put the apply middleware. Okay, and the middleware we want to apply is going to be anything that's in here. So we're going to use the spread operator and just put in middleware like that. All right, and then we just want to export as default store. All right, so we'll save that. So that's our store. Now the way that we implement this is actually, let's create our root reducer first, just because it's not there. So in source, I'm going to create a folder called reducers, and we're going to create a file called index.js. Okay, so this is the file that this is pointing to. And the root reducer is basically just a meeting place for all of your other reducers. So for instance, we're going to have a leads reducer that hands down the state that has to do with leads. We're going to have an auth reducer for authentication. We're going to have an errors reducer for bringing errors down to whatever components we want to bring errors into. So it's basically like a meeting place. So let's bring in, from Redux, we want to bring in something called combine reducers. Okay, and then we want to export default combine reducers, and then we simply pass in an object with any reducers that we have. Now we're going to have a leads reducer, but I'm not going to create that just yet. I'm just going to save this file as is, and I'm going to go to my main app component, so components, and then app.js, and here we want to actually bring in a couple things. We want to bring in our store. We also want to bring in the provider from React Redux. Remember, React Redux is the package that integrates the two together. So let's first bring in, let's say, import provider, and we want to bring this in from React-Redux, and then we also want to import our store from /store. All right, now the way that we connect Redux to React is through this provider. Now this provider, we actually need to wrap around everything. So we're going to go right in this return, and we're going to put in provider like this. Okay, so we want to wrap this around everything. All right, we'll push that over. Now the provider actually takes in the store as a prop, so we pass in store like that. All right, so let's save that. All right, now if I reload, I'm just going to open up my console here. Store does not have a valid reducer, which is understandable. We didn't create any reducer, so that makes sense. If we go to Redux, okay, now you can see that it looks different. It's not giving us an error that we don't have a store. So this will show us all of our state. Okay, we don't have any state right now, but it'll show us our state. It'll show us the diff. So if you create an action like submit a form or something like that, and you call an action and it changes your state, it sends down different state, it'll be in this diff. Okay, and any action that you commit or you create is going to get shown here as well. So this is, I don't know, I couldn't build with Redux without this extension. It's very important. So let's go back to the reducer, the root reducer, which is, where is it? I'm lost. So index.js, and we're going to import, let's see, we're going to have a leads reducer, we're going to have an auth reducer, stuff like that, but we're not going to get into that till later. Right now we're just going to deal with leads. Actually, we just want to do leads from ./leads. Okay, and then any reducer you bring in needs to go in this object. Okay, so we would say leads, and then what we brought in is leads. Now, since these are the same, we can simply just do this. Sometimes you might see like lead, reducer, leads, something like that, but I just call the file leads, so go like that. All right, now let's go into reducers and create a file called leads.js. Okay, now a reducer is basically it's a function that takes in an action where you basically evaluate an action and then you send down certain state depending on what that action does. All right, so for the leads, we're going to have, for instance, get leads, add lead, delete lead. And the way that we define these is with something called types. So I'm actually going to say import, and we're going to bring in some types. Okay, actually let's do one at a time. My first goal is to get the leads from the back end and display them here in the leads list component. So let's start with get_leads, and that's going to be from, and we're going to have a folder called actions. So we'll go out of the reducers into actions, and then a file called types.js. All right, now we don't have this file, so I'm going to go ahead and create it. So in source, we're going to create a folder called actions. And in actions, we're going to create a file called types.js. Now, types are basically just constants. Okay, so it's just a constant that holds a string. So we have get leads, so we're going to do export const get_leads, and we're just going to set it to a string of get leads. Okay, so it's just a place to hold all of our types. It's basically for organization. So we'll close that up. Now that we brought that in inside of our leads reducer, let's create the initial state. Okay, so we'll say const initial state, which is going to be an object, and we're going to have a leads array. Okay, and you can put whatever you want inside of your state, but all we really need is just these leads. Okay, because that's what we're fetching from our back end, and that's what we want to put into this state. So down here, we want to create a function. We need to export it as default, and this function is going to take in two things. So the first is the state, so state, and we're going to set the default to initial state, which we just defined, and then it also is going to take an action. Okay, because we're going to have a leads action file where we fire off functions and we can dispatch an action to the reducer. Okay, to get leads, add a lead, delete, and so on. Now we have to evaluate the type, the action type that's sent. So we could use an if statement, but common convention is to use a switch. So we'll say switch. In this action object, we're going to check for a type. Okay, and we're going to create a case for get leads, and then we need to decide what we want to return as state. Okay, now I know we only have leads up here, but let's say we had like something else, maybe it was, I don't know, just some text or something. We would also want to return that. So we don't want to do just leads, whatever. We want to include anything else that's in the state. So we do that by using the spread operator and then state. Okay, so that'll include whatever else is in the state. I'm just going to get rid of that. Now, in addition to that, we want to fill leads with the leads that are fetched from the server, and I'm actually going to send those as a payload in this action. Okay, so I'm going to set this to action.payload. And this might not make sense to you right now, but when we create the actions and we dispatch to this file, to this reducer, it'll make a little more sense. So let's do that, and then we also need a default. Let's see, we're going to say default and the default is just going to simply return the state. All right, so we'll save that. Now we need an actions folder, or we have an actions folder, but we need a leads action file. So in actions, alongside types.js, let's create a file called leads.js. All right, and any actions that we want to fire off are going to go in here. And this is actually where we're going to make all of our HTTP requests. I'm going to be using Axios, but if you want to use the fetch API, that's fine. If you want to use something else, that's fine as well. But in here, let's install Axios first of all. So I'm just going to stop this and do an npm install Axios. All right, so let's see. We're going to import Axios from Axios, and then I'm also going to import the get leads action, or I should say type get leads, and that's going to be from types, which is in the same folder. Okay, now we're going to have an action method here called get leads. I'm just going to put comments here. This get leads, and we want to export this. So export const get leads, and we're going to use an arrow function. All right, now since we're making a asynchronous request with Axios, we're actually making a request to this right here, this localhost 8000 API leads, although we don't have to add this because we're on the same server. That's another benefit about the way that we did React here. But we're using something called dispatch, and we could put another function in here and pass in dispatch, but an easier way, a cleaner way, is just to add it right here. So dispatch like that. And that's what we want to use whenever we want to dispatch an action to our reducer, okay, such as get leads. So within here, let's make our request. So we'll say Axios, and we're going to make a get request to /API/leads/, and then that's going to give us a promise back. So we want to do .then. It'll give us a response. All right, now what we want to do is dispatch the get leads action to the reducer. So we take dispatch and we just pass in an object with a type. Okay, remember in our reducer we're evaluating the action.type. Okay, so we want to send a type of get leads, so it fires this off right here. So let's say type get leads, and then remember this, the payload is going to be the leads that are returned from the server. So I'm going to send a payload with the response data from the server. All right, and then we'll do a .catch in case there's an error. And eventually I want to have a whole errors reducer that sends errors down to our components, but for now I'm just going to console log. Okay, so that's it. Let's save that. It's going to format a little bit just because I'm using Prettier. But yeah, that is our action. Now, how do we actually call this? Okay, and where do we call this? We want to call it from our leads component. So let's go into components, leads, and then leads.js. Okay, now in order to work with Redux from any component, you need to use something called connect. Okay, that's part of the React Redux package. So I'm going to import from, I'm going to import connect from React-Redux, and then we're going to have some properties. Whenever you have props in React, you want to use prop types. So I'm also going to import prop types from prop types. Okay. Now, let's see. We're also going to need to call that get leads, right? We need to the flow of this is we call get leads when the component mounts, and the leads come down from the reducer into the component as a prop. Okay, and actually before we get into that, let's just import the get leads action. So we want to import get leads from, and we want to go up outside of the leads folder, outside of the components folder, into actions, and we want the leads file. All right, now down here, whenever we use connect, we actually need to export default connect, and then we need to wrap the component name like that. All right, now not only just trying to think of how to explain this. Not only do we need to connect to it, but we need to get the state, and we need to be able to call this get leads method. So I'm going to go right above here, and I'm going to create a function, an arrow function called map state to props. And this takes a parameter of state, and then we want to just pass in here leads and set that and go state.leads.leads. Now this might look confusing to you if you're new to Redux, but basically we're taking, when we say map state, we're saying the state of Redux, basically the state that, you know, where is it? This right here. So we want to map that state to props of this component, so that we'll be able to say this dot props dot what leads. Okay. Now this we could call whatever we want. Leads makes sense because that's what we're getting. However, this state dot leads, this means we want the leads reducer. Okay. And then this is the part of the state that we want, which in the leads reducer is also called leads. So it might look a little funny that it says state.leads.leads, but what it means is the reducer, okay, this right here, whatever this is, would be that first leads. If I called this lead reducer, then in our component, it would be lead reducer.leads. All right. So we're mapping it to the props. Now that means we're going to have a prop called leads, so we need to add prop types. So let's go up here and let's say static prop types, and it's just an object, and we'll say leads, which is going to be I'm going to say prop types, and it's an array, so we'll say array, and it is required. Now this map state to props, it's not actually doing anything just yet. We need to pass it in to connect. So after connect, we want to open up a set of set of parentheses, and we want to pass in map state to props like that. All right, so let's actually save this, and with what we've done so far, let's see what happens. So if I reload, okay, so obviously nothing changes in the UI, but let's look at the state in the Redux tools, and you can see now we have this leads. Now the leads it's empty. You can see it's an empty array, and you might be asking, well, you know, we made the request here. Why don't we have the leads from Django? And the reason for that is we created get leads, but we haven't called it yet. So let's go back to the leads component, and just like we mapped the state that's coming down from the reducer to props, we can also call these methods from props, but we have to add a second parameter in here with an object with the method name, so get leads. All right, so now we have access to this.props.getLeads, and where we want to call that is when the component loads, right? When the list loads, or before it loads, when it mounts, we want to make that request or call that action. So we're going to use component did mount, and we're going to call this dot props dot get leads, like that. So let's save this and let's reload. And now if we look down in leads, you can see we have two items here. We have John Doe and we have Sam Smith. All right, so we successfully have called an action, made the request to our Django backend, got the leads, and we put them in our state. Okay, now they're not showing up here. We have to do that within our render. So let's actually use let's use a React fragment here. So we'll bring in fragment and we'll use fragment. So I want to have a table that has all of the leads inside. So first of all, let's put an H2 and we'll just say leads, and then we'll have a table, and let's give this table a class name of table and also table dash striped. So just bootstrap classes. And I'm going to make this smaller. We'll just close it for now. All right, so we have our table. Now we're going to have a T head, and inside here we'll have a table row with some table headings. So we want our ID, we're also going to have the name, email, and message. And then this last one here is just going to be an empty th, and that's going to be for the delete button. So now let's put the t body, and here's where we want to loop through the leads, and we can access them with this .props.leads. So I'm going to open up some curly braces here, and let's go ahead and say this .props.leads, and then we want to map through. So we're going to do .map. For each one, we'll call it lead, and then we're going to render some JSX, which is going to be the table rows. So let's say tr, and for the key, since this is a list, it needs to have a unique key, and I'm going to set that to the lead.id. All right, and then let's see, inside here we want each column. So the first is going to be the ID. So again, we'll do lead.id, and we'll copy this down a couple times. So we'll have ID, we have name, email, message, and then we want a delete button. So for now, I'm just going to put in a button and just say delete. All right, we'll give this a class name. Whoops. Give this a class name of btn, btn-danger, and btn-sm, which will make it smaller. Okay, we'll add that functionality later, but I just want to get the leads on the screen. So let's save that. And now, just make this smaller, if I can do it. And there we go. So now we're actually pulling those leads from the server. Okay, if I were to go to Postman, since I can't add them through the application yet, I can add them through here though. If I say like Jane Williams, and we go ahead and send, so that gets added to the server. Now if I go back to React and reload, there's Jane. Now I think in this video we can add the delete functionality as well, so let's do that. Now in order to do that, we need to add a new action. So let's see, in addition to get leads, we want to do delete lead. So same thing, I can actually copy this whole thing because it's pretty similar. So we'll call this delete lead Okay, now we're going to need to know which one to delete, so we'll put in an ID here. We'll pass in an ID, and we're going to make a request to API/leads/ and then the ID. So I'm actually going to use backticks here so that I can go like this, pass in an ID, and we want a trailing slash as well. All right, so then once that happens, once the lead gets deleted from the server, we want to then dispatch an action called delete lead, and we want to send the ID as the payload. So I'm just going to pass ID. Now this delete lead we haven't created a type for, so let's go up here and bring in delete lead, and let's go to our types file, which is in the actions folder, types, and I'll just go ahead and copy this down. Say delete lead. Okay, we'll save that. All right, and we'll just keep the console log error for now. So we'll save that. Now this delete lead is getting dispatched to the reducer. So let's go back to the leads reducer, and let's add a case for that. So we'll go right below the case of get leads. Actually, let's bring in delete lead up here. Okay, and then we're going to do case delete lead, and we want to return any current state. And then for the leads, basically we want to filter through, and we want to only return the ones that are not the ID that were deleted. So we can do that by saying state.leads. Okay, that accesses the leads in the state. And then we're going to use filter, which is a high order array method. And we'll loop through and say for each lead, we want to return anything where the lead.id, or the current iteration, the ID, is not equal to the action.payload. Because remember, I sent the ID that we're deleting as a payload. Okay, so that should delete it on the server and then run the reducer and then delete it within the UI. So let's save that, and we have to call this at some point, right? We want to call it when we click the button here. So let's go back to our component, and along with get leads, we're going to bring in delete lead, and we have to add it down here. Okay, so now we should have access to this.props.delete lead. Now again, we want to call this when the button gets clicked. So let's go right here on this button, and let's add, let's say on click, we want to call this.props.delete lead, and we need to send the ID, so we're going to do a .bind, and when we do .bind, this is going to be the first param, and then we can send whatever we want. Let's send the lead.id. All right, so we'll save that, and let's reload the page, and you'll be able to see it here, and you can see that the actions that run show right here. When the page loads, or when this component loads, it shows the get leads action, because that runs in order to get these leads. Now let's go ahead and click one of these, and you can see that it disappears from the UI. It calls the delete lead action, and it shows us the diff, which is this lead has been deleted. Okay, and if we look at the state now, it only has one. Or actually, no, it has two. I'm sorry, there were three. All right, and if we reload the page, it's, oh, that didn't work. Oh, wait a minute. Why didn't that work? It worked on, except for actually deleting it from the server, and that's because it is a GET request. So basically, it got it from the server, and then it dispatched delete lead and just deleted it from the UI. So we just want to change this to delete, Axios delete. So hopefully that works. Let's try it again. So we delete and we reload and it's gone. Good. Now I know this video is getting kind of long, but we still have quite a bit to do, and I don't want this to be too many videos. I'd rather have less videos, but longer amounts of time. So let's do the add lead form. So I'm going to just close up some of this stuff that we don't need. And let's see. For the add lead, let's start off with just creating the actual form. So we're going to go into the component. I'll close all of them up. So we're going to go into the form.js component, and of course we need to create a form. So let's add a little bit of state, because in React when we have a form we want each input to be part of the state of the component. So I'm going to say state, and we're going to have name, email, and message. Oh, you know what? One thing I forgot to do in the leads component is add these methods or these functions as props in prop types. So let me just do that real quick. So we have get leads, which is prop types dot func dot is required. All right, we'll just copy that down, and we also have delete lead. It still works without the prop types. It's just good practice. All right. So back to the form component, we have our state. Now, for the actual form, I'm just going to paste this in because I don't want to waste too much time just writing out markup. So let me just grab this real quick. All right, so I'm going to just replace this div right here, and I'll just go over it. So basically we have a containing div with a card body class, margin top, margin bottom. H2, we have a form that has an event, an onSubmit. It's going to call this.onSubmit. And then we have each input that has a name. It has an onChange, which we're going to create up above, because when we type anything in the form, it's going to fire this onChange off, and we need to update the state because each input is connected to a piece of state. All right, and then we have that value, which I actually have to pull out of the state. So I'm going to go up here and just say const. We want name, email, and message from this dot state. Okay, so that pulls those values out. We're using those here. And then down here we just have a submit button. So pretty simple. Now let's create the onChange and the onSubmit. So onChange takes an event, and let's just say this dot set state, and we're going to put in our state object and just use some brackets here so we can grab the name. So e.target.name, which is going to reflect whatever this is. So this name is name, this name is email, and so on, which should match the state. And then we're going to set that to the value, so e.target.value. All right, so that's our onChange, and then the onSubmit. Actually, we want to pass in that, and we want to e.prevent default. And for now, we'll just do a console log submit. All right, so let's save that, see if this renders. Okay, so there's our form, good. And we should be able to enter stuff in here. Oops, it has to be an email. Submit, and if we look at our console, we get submit. Good. Okay, so we need to call an action when we submit this. So we're going to have an action called add lead that's going to update the server. So we're going to make a post request to the server, and then we want to dispatch an action to our reducer that's going to then send the leads back down to this component. So if you're new to Redux, you can see how this is helpful in sharing state, right? We update, we add a lead here, it should automatically reflect down here. Okay, so let's see, where should we start? Let's do the action. So we'll go to our actions folder and then leads.js. Let's have another type called add lead. And of course we need to add that to our types. Okay, so we'll bring that in, and then let's create add lead. I'm going to copy this. Okay, so we'll paste that in, and then change the name to add lead. And it's going to take in a lead as well. Okay, then we're going to dispatch. We're going to call Axios, or pass in dispatch, call Axios, make a post request. Okay, so yeah, we'll make a post request to API leads, and then we need to pass in lead. And let's see, make dot then. We're going to dispatch add lead, and then the payload again is going to be the data that comes back, because when we add a lead to the server, it gives us it back with the ID and all that stuff. So we're going to send that as the payload, and I think that should be good. So let's save that. Let's go to our reducer, and let's add down here. Actually, first of all, let's bring in the type of add lead, and then case add, whoops. So case add lead, and we want to return any current state, and then for leads, we're going to use the spread here, and we're going to say state.leads, so any leads that are already there. In addition, we want to add the payload, which is going to be the new lead. All right, so we'll save that. Now let's go to the add component, because we need to call that action. We need to call this add lead action right here. So in components form.js, we need to do all the stuff we did in the leads to be able to link it to Redux. We need to bring in connect from React Redux. And let's also bring in prop types. Actually, another trick, you can do IMPT, tab or enter, and it'll actually just bring in prop types for you. So let's see, we also need to bring in our action. Slash leads. Okay, and then down here, we need to export connect. Oops. All right, now with the leads component, we had to do map state to props, because we were bringing in state, we were bringing in leads. With this component, we're simply calling the action. We don't need to bring leads back in. So what we can do is put in null for map state to props. However, we do need to add the method that we're going to call, which is add lead. All right, so let's do that, and then where we want to call this is obviously in the on submit. Now, before we call it, we need to basically construct the lead, which the values are going to be in the state. So let's say const name, email, message, and these are going to be from this dot state. We're going to pull them out, and then let's create a variable called lead, and just add these values as part of this object. So email, message, which is the same as doing like, message. All right, and then we'll call this dot props dot add lead, and we'll pass in lead. All right, and let's add it as a prop type. So up here we'll say static prop types dot func is required. All right, so let's save that. We may get an error or something at first, but we'll fix it. So let's try it out. We'll reload, and let's say Matt Johnson, Matt at Gmail. Okay, let's try it out. Submit. There it is. So it gets added here. Let's reload, and it's still there. Good. All right, guys, so this video is getting kind of long. I think that now that we can actually add leads and list them and delete them, I think in the next video what I want to do is start to handle errors and messages. And this isn't something that we really have to do, but I think that it builds an overall better application. We're going to use something called React Alert, where we can have a little pop-up come down and tell us that, whatever, this email is already taken or something like that. Because actually, let me show you real quick. If I try to add, let's say John Doe, jdoe at Gmail, which remember is already taken, if I submit, notice how it doesn't get added. Okay, if I open up my console, it gives us an error here, which doesn't even really, it just tells us it's a bad request, which it is because the email is already there. It's already in the database. So I want to be able to handle these errors better. I want it to say, well, this email has already been taken. So we're going to create a whole errors reducer for that, and then create an alerts component. All right, so we'll get into that next.